Hello and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about 5 of what I think are the weirdest production guitars ever made. Just to clarify, in this video I'm only going to be talking about full production models. I'm not going to be covering one-off custom shop builds or signature models because both of those could be entirely separate videos in their own right. But the ones I have got to talk about here today are full production models from major manufacturers. So let's get into it. And we're going to be starting off with the Gibson Corvus. Now arguably this is 3 models because there were different variations on this, but they all share the same body shape as well as a fairly standard build. That being an older body with a bolt-on maple neck, a rosewood fingerboard and a 24.75 inch scale length, as well as a Schuler wraparound tailpiece. Other than that, these were separated into 3 different models, the Corvus 1, 2 and 3. The Corvus 1 featured a single humbucker design, the 2 featured a twin humbucker design, and the 3 featured 3 single coils. The controls on these guitars were fairly traditional to their pickup configuration, and these guitars had a fairly short-lived production life between 1982 and 1984, which was a time period when Gibson were making some very weird guitars, another one of which we'll get to slightly later in this video. Now the name Corvus comes from the Latin word for crow or raven, and the design was said to invoke a crow in flight when viewed from the side. Although if you ask me, I think it looks like a bottle opener, but hey. It was part of Gibson's attempt to try and do some more futuristic designs, a bit like they did in the 50s also. Now moving on, our next guitar to talk about is the Fender Performer. The Fender featured an alder or a basswood body, 24 frets on a maple neck, and a Schuler floating trem. They also featured 2 high output humbuckers and fairly traditional controls, albeit with the addition of the TBX tone control. TBX standing for treble bass expander. What this was a passive style tone control, but that allowed you to also boost the treble and bass with it. Now again, this is another 80s model, and these were available between 1985 and 1986. And unlike with the Gibsons, there was also a bass version of this guitar, which is equally weird looking. Next up, we're going to come over to this side of the pond and have a look at a British manufacturer, but a name that you might not necessarily expecting to hear in relation to guitars, as they're more known for their amps. But the company in question is Vox, and more specifically the Vox Phantom model. Now this guitar featured quite a unique teardrop shape, made from either alder or ash, and it featured a bolt-on neck with a rosewood fretboard. It was available as both a 6 and 12 string model as well as a bass, and there were special models of this which came with added features such as built-in effects and various other functions. These models actually spanned for most of the 1960s, as well as there being more modern reissues including a mini version which you can still get now. So we're going to head back to Gibson now for another one of their weird shapes, and that is the Moderne. Now the original design for this guitar was done in the late 50s and came from the same modernistic design language which gave us the Flying V and the Explorer, and you can see a bit of the Flying V in this model, albeit a bit more weird. That being said, this model wasn't actually produced until 1982 and would only be produced until 1983. Spec-wise, it came with either a 1 or 2 piece carina body and a set carina neck also. It featured a 24.75 inch scale length with 22 frets, had a rosewood fretboard and a medium C-shaped neck, dot inlays and 2 humbuckers, which generally were Tim Shaw PAF reissue pickups. It was a fairly traditional control layout of 2 volumes, 1 tone and a 3-way selector, and it also had a Tune-o-matic bridge and gold hardware with Clouson Gibson style tuners. Now, as is with all the early Carina Gibson stuff, these have become quite sought after and quite highly collectible, and that led to a custom shop run of these that was also released in 2012. And finally, that brings us on to my last pick for this video, which is the Gretsch 6126 Astrojet. Now this guitar was introduced around 1964 and went on and was discontinued sometime around 1967. Now this timing is important because of course in the 60s you had the space race, and that is very much where this guitar draws its inspiration from, and it's been quoted as having a space-age design aesthetic, whatever that means. This guitar featured a solid mahogany body with a mahogany set neck, an ebony bound fingerboard with half moon inlays, 22 frets and a 24.5-inch scale length. It featured 2 Gretsch Supertron humbuckers, which were a variant of D-Almond pickups, and it can be seen with several different types of trem and bridge. It featured Grover tuners, but in a slightly weird 4 and 2 configuration, a bit like a Music Man, but a lot more clunky looking. But really with this guitar, the most interesting part about it, other than the sort of weird, loosely SG inspired design, is the controls. Now, it was fairly standard Gretsch in that it has a master volume as well as volumes for each pickup, tone and switches as you'd expect. But like with the Vox that we spoke about earlier, it's also had some inbuilt features, including a standby fuzz and sustain switch. Later models of this guitar would repurpose the switch for other things, but for me the fuzz and sustain circuit is quite an interesting one. But there you go, so that's 5 of what I think are some of the weirdest production models ever made. Now I know there are plenty more out there, so what I want you to do is drop a comment down below, let me know what some of your picks would be for this list, and maybe we can do a part 2 and have a look at a few more. But that's going to do us for today, so let me know your thoughts on these 5 guitars down in the comments, and as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.